Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the August 2024 edition of Socialism for All, and in it we're going to do kind of a Marxism 101 topic that comes up every few years, and it is, do communists vote in capitalist elections? In other words, what is the basic Marxist-communist approach to this topic? If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon or buy me a coffee at patreon.com/socialismforall or buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall, and there are links to Patreon and buy me a coffee in the video description. Okay, so we recently did this topic on the YouTube community posts, and I also posted it on Patreon, Medium, and Substack, which I often do for some of the longer articles. As I mentioned, this topic comes up every few years because, well, in the United States, which is where the majority of the audience of this channel is, there is a presidential election every 4 years, including this year. And then every 2 years after that are the midterm elections, where the president isn't up for election or re-election, but there are congressional and other seats which are. The last time I really addressed this topic head on was in a very long video. I think it's like 2 hours and 40 minutes back in 2020. The first year that we were doing this channel. And it's basically framed as a response video to the streamer Vosh, who at the time was trying to use this list of quotes of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Mao to support the argument that US leftists should vote for the Democratic Party and Joe Biden in particular. Terrible argument. It shows that he really doesn't read or understand any Marxist theory or history at all, and also not looking critically at what the Democratic Party does and doesn't do. But in any case, somebody was asking me about some of these topics, and through that conversation, I decided to take some of it and put it into a post, because I know that they're not the only person who is committed to learning Marxism and maybe just started with that recently, and they have a bunch of liberals around them telling them that they absolutely have to vote for the Democratic Party and the fate of the world depends on it, etc., etc. So I want to thank that commenter, as like I said, I did draw from our conversation, and I also want to thank Kevin for the George Jackson quote from Blood in My Eye, which starts this off. So, when we participate in elections to win instead of disrupt, we're lending to the fascist system's credibility and destroying our own. Unquote. Capitalist elections are a secondary, back-burner topic for communists and for class-conscious workers as a whole. If you're going to vote, don't vote for a capitalist party. The Party for Socialism and Liberation, or PSL, and the Green Party both are running candidates for office this year, as they often do, and while valid criticisms exist of both those parties, they're not cut from the same neoliberal cloth as the Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, and whatever other quote-unquote centrist, really right-wing, dreck the system has coughed up lately. And I want to emphasize here, as I edited into the post later, to be clear, this post is intended to give an overall 101 introductory, cursory discussion about communists and elections, which comes up every 2 to 4 years in the US. I don't explicitly endorse either of the two parties I mentioned in this article, and whose graphics I displayed in the post. Again, that's PSL and the Greens. I'm just pointing out left parties who do consistently run candidates, and insofar as neither of them actually stands any real chance of winning major seats in the government, in other words, they're just advertising their existence by running, there's absolutely no harm to be had from voting for either of them, in the sense that they're going to get into government and do something stupid, because they're not going to get into the government, for those who do want to vote. So ultimately, the question of how to advance the class struggle in the US is going to be answered by the masses themselves. My position at this time, as a guy running a YouTube channel, is just to encourage people who are currently standing on the sidelines to do something rather than nothing. Basically, take your level of activity that you're currently doing and increase it. So however simple or small that step may be at this point, whatever I can persuade you to do, please go do it. That's because overall, I think at this point that even mistaken action and the experience, discussion, and lessons that can be gained from even mistaken action would be preferable to the long-standing inaction that has plagued the U.S. working class movement. In other words, people are sitting there frozen. The labor unions have seen enormous declines in membership over the last, 60 years plus. And there are structural reasons for that also, but there's also sort of people just bailing out and becoming atomized, basically just hailing the bourgeoisie. That's not going to help at all. Weak struggle makes a weak vanguard. Remember that the vanguard is just the most class-conscious portion of the overall movement. And you definitely can gain class consciousness from studying economics, history, Marxist theory, but really the biggest strides come directly out of firsthand experience in the real world doing class struggle. And then, going back to the books, it can kind of help to put your own experiences in perspective and go, oh, okay, that's the mistake that our movement ran into, etc. And then the next time that you go back into the struggle, you've improved your perspective and you're more likely to be victorious and make better gains. So yeah, overall, I think that I would rather see people screwing up, but at least trying to do something than just standing there with their hands in their pockets, unless they're on strike. But you get what I mean. And also a commenter asked, can you talk about some of the criticisms that exist of PSL and of the Green Party? So the Green Party we've talked about a lot. That's where I kind of got started many years ago. But basically, the Green Party is not a Marxist party. Therefore, the kind of organizing and ideological education that they do is not in line with Marxist principles. So you're going to find all kinds of populists and anarchists, or maybe not necessarily hugely dedicated anarchists or whatever, but people who at least have some smattering of maybe they've read Bookchin. You're going to find a lot of social democracy and reformism. So yeah, it's not a Marxist party, and they don't kind of uphold any sort of ideological rigor with respect to that. So you're going to find all kinds of left trends, many of which are dead ends as shown by historical experience. However, the Green Party can be good at working on particular activist campaigns. And I'm not a big fan of Jill Stein, even within the Green world. I think that there are other wings of the Green Party that I prefer. But right now, for example, her campaign is putting out pretty good messaging on Gaza from what I've seen, Israel's genocide in Gaza. Granted, a lot of other opportunists are getting that correct as well, but it does stand in stark contrast to, say, the Democratic Party. And then as far as PSL, they are one of the larger organizations in the US which is Marxist but not Trotskyist, although they do have their origins in Marxism, which is a US offshoot of Trotskyism. The organization also has been accused of covering up sexual abuse. I honestly don't know whether those accusations have merit or not, just that they have been made. And it should be noted that accusations are easy to make and cost nothing. But again, I don't know whether that's true or not. For me, I just stop at the upholding of socialism with Chinese characteristics as socialism. It's interesting, and I may do a video on this, but if you go back into the PSL's Liberation School website and search on China, they have articles going back to 2005, and some of the older stuff, like even from Brian Becker in 2007, says that, full capitalist restoration in China is really just around the corner, and there's barely a ghost of a chance that it's not going to just fully and openly reintroduce capitalism. So I feel like the organization knows better, but now it's, teaming up with Chow Collective to... There was a series they did recently where it was like, I was skimming through the video, and I stopped on one of the talking points, which was, this topic is more complex than Westerners can understand. Okay. But anyway, for a little bit more discussion on the topic of both those parties, we actually have an audiobook on the channel by Howie Hawkins called The Case for an Independent Left Party from 2020. I honestly haven't read it since then. I did like it at the time. Basically, from what I recall, Hawkins argues for turning the Green Party into a mass membership party, kind of like modeled after the old Socialist Party USA, and basically contrasting this mass party idea to the more vanguard party that PSL strives to be. All right, anyway, going back to the post that I made, while a Marxist party may make an electoral campaign part of its struggle at one time or another for tactical reasons like taking a head count of how many people support a party like this, promoting workers' causes, or if seats are actually won in the government, using them as a bully pulpit to agitate for demands that capitalism cannot fulfill. The idea here being that as the struggle for various reforms and concessions heats up, and the masses are engaging in increased levels of struggle and actually making gains and having victories, the communists then encourage this beyond the bounds of capitalism by saying, yes, go get the whole thing. If you like what you've been doing now, you're going to like this even more, except we're going to have to smash through capitalism to get it. So anyway, aside from these tactical reasons for an electoral run, no communist believes that capitalist elections are a direct path to actual power. Real workers' power, in other words, the kind needed to build socialism, comes through setting up alternative or parallel authorities like workers' councils. Of course, Soviet means council, in case you didn't know that, which becomes possible through the efforts of militant labor unions acting under communist influence. So in other words, where do these Soviets come from? And they come from militant labor organizations. In the case of Russia, there were some other themes to those organizations, but that was in part a consequence of Russia's stage of development at that time, in terms of capitalism not being that advanced there. But in any case, the proletariat was always in the lead politically. So then, particularly during times of elevated capitalist crisis, in other words, windows of opportunity, these revolutionary workers' organizations can launch coordinated actions, and you never know exactly what the trigger for that is going to be, but the point is to challenge the existence of the entire capitalist order and all its institutions, which were set up to maintain capitalism, and which must be replaced by new institutions which are meant to build, expand, and maintain socialism. So by contrast, and this is where a lot of what you find in the current scenario comes into play, working class liberals and working class conservatives' insistence on the struggles between capitalist political parties as being of central or even major importance is a product of low class consciousness and a defeated labor movement. This is really important to understand. When workers lose our independent proletarian class perspective, we can then fall prey to capitalist influence, which strives to create false consciousness in us. In other words, false consciousness is when your ideology and your mindset doesn't match your actual class position. Workers who fall victim to it start to think that our interests are served by capitalism, when in fact the exact opposite is true. Capitalism serves the interests of the 1% who own industry. We actually don't have an interest in that system. That's why the capitalists spend so much money on their media. They have to propagate capitalist ideas 24/7 so that the default messages we receive in the normal course of going about our lives in society, whether that's institutions like family, school, work, etc., encourage us to think thoughts and take actions which either strengthen capitalism or at least don't hurt it too much. So how do we hurt capitalism and take our lives back? The only thing that can end capitalism is working class revolution. Therefore, this is just the simple logic of it, until there is a working class revolution, the current system of advanced monopoly capitalism, which is also called imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism by Marxist-Leninists, will keep running like a computer program until someone, or really a lot of us working together, shuts it down. Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, always behaves in a certain set of ways due to its basic contradictions and instabilities. These can never be changed without ending it. In other words, its material interests just make it act in that way, and if it had different material interests, it wouldn't be imperialism. But it is, and it does, and that's what it does, and it will just keep running this way until we shut it down. So, in other words, the reformist social democrats, who tell us that imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, can be made better a little at a time, or that we can make it behave contrary to its nature on a permanent basis, are only prolonging its oppression of us. And on that point, I want to make a note that Marxists do believe in pursuing reforms under capitalism to improve living and working conditions in the short term, but the struggle for these reforms always needs to be planned and executed with a building of class consciousness and an eventual revolutionary end to capitalism in mind. For more on this, see Luxemburg's Reform or Revolution, which we have on the channel. In other words, as long as the bourgeoisie or the capitalists are in charge, it's their system, they have the political power, they control the state, they make decisions. We can temporarily, through various actions, force them into making certain concessions to us, but they're going to repeal those as soon as it's politically feasible for them to do that. So you can never get complacent like, oh, we won this, now it just exists. Well, no, they're going to roll it back eventually as soon as they think that you've let your guard down. So that's why all of this has to build toward revolution. It's the only way you're going to keep any of it. And then also, what you won under capitalism is going to look paltry compared to what you can actually build after capitalism in socialism. So continuing, in August 2024, the U.S. working class is unfortunately too demoralized, disorganized, and disoriented to end imperialism right now. Correcting that is a high priority, but it's not going to happen by throwing coins down the wishing well of imperialist electoralism. Instead, the workers' struggle is centered mainly in the industrial conquests of the labor unions, which again are severely lacking right now, and rebuilding those is of the utmost importance, with the political arm of that struggle, which is, in other words, the workers' quest to conquer state power, being an outgrowth of that central industrial struggle. And the political arm of that struggle is only able to carry forward in a way that actually lands those lessons of the class struggle which have been gained and realized by the movement itself. So, in other words, you can read all the books you want and you can get it, but the movement as a whole has to recognize the truth of that, and you can't necessarily just persuade them into it unless they have some personal experience. And so I made a note, Lenin's What is to be Done is all about this, including the specific function of the leading communist vanguard in relation to the mass workers' movements. And that is, of course, a two-way relationship. The party listens to and then advises the movement. In other words, the party says, what do you want to do? And the masses say, here's what we want, here are our demands. The party then helps the masses to filter this through the historical and theoretical lens, coming up with a strategy that is actually most likely to win and doesn't just rely on spontaneous trial and error indefinitely. But, again, the broad masses ultimately are the ones who engage in production, and it's the proximity to the means of production, the workplaces, the raw materials, which is what give the masses revolutionary potential. And they're the ones who ultimately decide history, whether they're going to make revolution or what they're going to do. Again, the role of communists in the vanguard is to study history, study economics, and advise the masses and try to foster class consciousness and successful strategies. So that relationship is an important back and forth dialectical relationship because the masses, again, are only going to extend so much trust to the vanguard. They will listen, hopefully, at least some of them will listen, and they will say, my experience tells me that what you're saying is likely true or untrue, or I don't know, but you've been right in the past, or you've been wrong in the past, and therefore I'm going to trust or not trust you now. This is why it's important for the vanguard to be in touch with and to have their finger on the pulse of the masses. You don't want to get too far ahead and completely lose touch and start doing adventurous, disconnected actions, but you also don't want to fall behind the masses and start tailing them. The point is to lead forward to victory. And we are talking about social change here, so there is some amount of challenge inherent to that relationship. The vanguard is challenging the masses to move forward. And, that's a little scary. And there's going to be the more advanced masses who are right there and saying, yes, tell us what to do next. We're ready. There's going to be more the middle masses who are a bit more ambivalent. And there's going to be the more backward masses who are really in the thrall of the bourgeoisie. And they're watching Fox News and they're watching CNN and believing every word and lapping it up. And they're afraid of communists and they're afraid of class struggle and they just want to hide and pretend that they are temporarily embarrassed millionaires. So yeah, these are living relationships and their dynamics are part of an active, ongoing historical process. If you let this go slack, which is kind of what's happened in the last half century, then really it falls apart and you got to start over again. That's kind of where we are now. I mean, not completely, but there's really a lot of rebuilding that is needed. So on that note, what do we do now? We agitate, educate, and organize step by step toward our goals as they arise. And I used graphics from the PSL presidential campaign and also the Green Party campaign. So I often try to link back to the source when I use graphics, and those are the websites there. So that's it. I hope that you found this 101 on this topic useful. I have tried to recommend some readings here, which would make good additional foundational reading. And as always, if you have follow-up questions, as is often the case, let me know in the comments or contact me in DM somewhere. A lot of times videos just like this one get spawned by one of those conversations, so you never know. Any good faith question is always welcome. Sometimes, you're the 10th person to ask me this month, and I feel like answering the question, and a video pops out, and then, hundreds or thousands of people can benefit from that. We try to do a range of levels of material on this channel, some basic beginner stuff. And again, if you're looking for where to begin, go to the Home tab on the YouTube channel, click Home, and then scroll down. And you're going to see a section of playlists that says recommended reading lists. Listen to those. They are here to help you. There's a lot of foundational readings in there, and it will really help bring you up to speed quickly. And then, the faster that more people get the foundations covered, then the more likely that people can follow along when we do more advanced material as well. Some of this material is really aimed just at communists who've been studying for a while other things are aimed at more left-curious people. And after doing this for a while, I have somewhat more of a sense now of what's going to take off and what isn't, but you never know sometimes. I did this Chris Hedges thing recently it got like 10,000 views, which is a lot for this channel inside of like a couple of weeks. So, I definitely don't want to dumb down the content, but there also clearly is a need and an interest for, kind of accessible starting points too. And as I get away from my beginner studies, I don't want to, totally neglect that. So anyway, if you have other questions, let me know. Otherwise, thanks for listening. And thanks to the current patrons and Buy Me a Coffee supporters whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, patreon.com/socialismforall or buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall. Every donation is encouraging. They're also materially helpful. This channel is non-commercial, ad and sponsorship free, so it is just viewer supported. Those contributions are essential and very much appreciated. So big thanks to all of the patrons and Buy Me a Coffee supporters over the years, as well as people who send in links and topic ideas. This channel really is intended to be a resource for the real world movement, and so I'm always looking for ways to present things that are interesting to me, which is a crucial ingredient because I'm the one who actually has to sit down and write the thing or, record the video or whatever, but that, hopefully also strikes a chord with others. And, sometimes it goes more in one direction or more in the other. Anyway, like, share, subscribe, network with your local left, and we will see you in the next video.